For John Brice from Football Scoop, I'm Tim Priester from Irish Illustrated, and this is Irish Illustrated Insider on Monday, February 24th. Welcome back, everybody. We have a special guest in segment two. As some of you already know, we're bringing in Eric Thomas, our recruiting analyst, to talk about some of the topics that people have been asking about. It's a dead period in recruiting, so that accounts for some of the limited activity that Notre Dame has been involved in. But we'll get into some of that with Eric in segment two, and then talk about some of the specific prospects that are on Notre Dame's wish list in the class of 2026. But first, segment one. Not a lot of breaking news with regard to the football program. We do want to start with I want to start with you, John, with regard to Mike Martin. We expect him to be officially named soon, but that hasn't happened yet. So we will let you know when that does. But Mike Martin is in the process of he's been busy. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's the best way of putting it, TP. He's in town. He started working in the Goog around the middle of last week. Been very active. He'll have a very much lead role as Notre Dame looks to fill out the rest of its personnel staff. Probably two official openings right now. Obviously, he replaces Chad Bowden and brings with him 2 decades of NFL experience and also time as a collegiate player in the SEC. But they still have to technically replace Zaire Turner. I also think that Mike will be empowered to add probably someone, basically an assistant GM role. Is my understanding, and he's been making calls already. I'm told that he's spoken with approximately three different people in the SEC. He spoke with someone in the ACC. He spoke with someone in Big 12 territory, and he's also talked to some NFL people. So he's been very active. Notre Dame is very much in that process. They're receiving considerable interest from ACC schools. They're also gauging the interest of some top flight ACC schools and their personnel people. So this is a situation where Notre Dame is very much being thorough and very much going after personnel that can help them elevate their recruiting to an all new level. And that's the way it's been put to me. It's like we've been really good. We know that there's more we can get.
Irish Illustrated, of course, will report on all that when we get that news. John Brice of Football Scoop as well. I do want to mention here in segment one that the great Zack Martin, and that is no exaggeration. The great Zack Martin, after 11 seasons in the NFL, is that right? Yeah, 11 seasons in the NFL. He is. There is no doubt about it. Zack Martin is headed to the NFL Hall of Fame in due time. Just 34 years old. Poor guy's got to start a whole new career at 34, but he had 11 really quality seasons, banged up a couple times along the way, but nine Pro Bowls, one of four offensive guards on the all-decade team in the NFL, and also one of 11 offensive guards with at least five Pro Bowls. Just a fantastic player, great representative of Notre Dame, two-time captain. Tim O'Malley is giving him a little bit of time to reflect on his retirement from the NFL before he gets back in touch with them. But Zack Martin, I mean, when you list the guys that we have covered that you have the most respect for, Zack Martin is right up there.
And he makes the all decade team, even though he didn't start playing until 2014 professionally. So I think that gives you an idea of the immense respect that he commanded from his peers, as I've alluded to on a couple of previous podcasts over the last couple of years. I got to have a couple of different dinner events with Jason Garrett, and it was fun to hear him talk about Zack Martin, to hear him tell some stories together about Zack Martin and Jason Witten, and then talking to some people close to Jason Witten because we come from almost the same hometown in East Tennessee. Just to hear those two guys described as the ultimate football guys, nobody who outworked them. They had incredible talent, but again, when you visited with Jason Garrett, you would hear him, and you could especially see him talk about them in a way that let you know the reverence and respect he had for them. And it was because they never relied only on their talent. They absolutely worked their butts off to try and maximize their talents. And you're right, TP. He'll be a first ballot Pro Football Hall of Famer, and he'll be one of those guys that goes in as soon as he's eligible.
Of course, he was an offensive tackle at Notre Dame, and then you go to the combine and you measure the arms, and the arms quite aren't quite as long as what you'd like them to be for an offensive tackle. So he was pretty much moved to offensive guard in short order. But man, did he make the most of it. And right behind him is another great offensive guard who is listed as an offensive tackle. Never played offensive tackle at Notre Dame, but Quentin Nelson is really following in his footsteps, racking up Pro Bowl assignments and just putting together a great career as well. I want to and I'm the other day, John, I wrapped up. Irish Illustrated subscribers have seen, one by one, I've been going through the Notre Dame opponents, and it's the portal additions. And Notre Dame has 8, and I think most of those guys are going to be solid contributors slash starters. You start to look at Notre Dame's opponents. Purdue has 28 guys that they got from the portal, and they need to do that to really build up to a level of competitive football, which they didn't have. Arkansas has 22 coming in. I don't want to give it away for the subscribers, but we rank, and 24/7 ranks them too. I'm trying to use my own ranking of them, but I have seen what 24/7 has done. Notre Dame's opponents, where they rank as far as their collection of players in the transfer portal compared to the 12 opponents. I will say Notre Dame's not rated number one in this because you have some teams there that have really gone out and added a whole bunch of talent. Notre Dame's not in a position where they have to make wholesale changes, but I think they've done a pretty good job of patching holes and they have 2 4 stars that are coming, 4-star portal guys, not where they were ranked when they were in high school, the 2 4-star portal guys, and of course is Devontae Smith, the nickelback from Alabama, and Malachi Fields, a wide receiver from Virginia.
Yeah, and TP, you do a great job really diving inside these numbers, and I've really enjoyed as you've done these portal analyzations and some of the other things that you did in December and looking at the portal class. I think it's been fantastic content. But you make a great point. Look, Texas A&M brought in 14 dudes out of the portal, and 247 had 6 of them ranked as 4 stars. You alluded to the fact that Purdue brought in twice that number of players. USC brought in 10. Arkansas brought in 20. So there's teams that have a lot more glaring needs than Notre Dame, and so that's why some of these portal classes in your rankings and on already what 247 has done are going to rank ahead of Notre Dame. What I do think where Notre Dame deserves credit is how efficient Notre Dame has been in the portal. And while we don't know a lot because team runs are just kind of now getting started over on campus, I can tell you that the early returns has a lot of people super excited for Devontae Smith. I don't want to overhype anybody, but the way it was put to me last week was, quote, "We got a dude." And they really like what they're seeing out of Devontae Smith, the physical stature that he already possesses, the way that he carries himself. They're super fired up about that. And I did want to note also, as it comes to another mid-year enrollee, but a 4-year guy, Cam Herron. I'm told that they had a goal that they wanted to get him up to a certain weight by the time the season rolls around or camp or whatever, and that they thought he would come around 270 or 275 when he signed. He's already up to 290. So again, he's impressed very early on, flashed very early on, just in the way that he's already taking care of his body, reshaping his body, and adding some weight that they were going to want to put on him.
Yeah, physical maturity is the term that I use for a guy like Devontae Smith. I mean, just explosive and strong and very aggressive, and a guy that's obviously going to step in the starting lineup for them. And I've commented about this, and we'll wrap up segment 2 with some basketball talk here, men's and women's. But I as I was going through these, I was surprised that first of all, it looks to me like there are fewer portal additions by most teams on average. And of course, Arkansas doing what Arkansas has to do, and Purdue obviously doing what they had to do, had to bring in, a couple dozen plus. It makes me think that, and maybe you can talk to this, John, it makes me think that maybe, or perhaps what is happening here is that they're investing more in their own players, which we know Notre Dame has made a strong move to do, as opposed to going out and getting 14 transfers, again, looking for culture and continuity. You bring in about 8. I thought they might go out and get more than that. They didn't. They're at 8. They could, I guess, at the end of spring. But it seems to me that teams maybe are investing more in the guys in trying to keep the guys that were on their roster from the previous season, carry them into the following season.
Yeah, and specific to Notre Dame, that was Notre Dame's approach during their playoff run when the portal opened, and we know they had very few players go in, and it was all about we believe we got the right guys. We're going to reinvest in our roster and fill some specific needs via the portal rather than just going out there and trying to make wholesale changes when we feel like we've got the guys we've almost completely now. This was Notre Dame talking in December, and so saying we've almost completely now generated this roster since we got here. So we believe in the guys. We know the guys. We've evaluated, we've recruited, and we've begun to develop the guys. But you are seeing more of that around the country, TP. University of Tennessee, for example, invested heavily as they had some guys being lured toward the portal in December and January, and they reinvested in those, fended off some people to retain quarterback Nico Iamaleava. They fended off some people to retain their top wide receivers, a couple of defensive players. There were some other SEC programs that said that they were very much going heavy into investing to keep their guys on hand, especially as they were in critical positions where they needed to keep as many as possible and add some key pieces because they're going into must-win years in 2025. So Auburn comes to mind in that regard. Somebody at Arkansas telling me that they had lost fewer defensive players year over year with T. Will as their defensive coordinator. They were pleased by that. So even though they added 20, they felt that they had still had some good retention, some quality retention. One other thing to factor in this is the fact that a lot of programs know the next government meet or the next hearing, the judge awards the rules on the House settlement ultimately April 7th. That revenue share then is scheduled to start July 1st. And that's when folks know they've got to start trimming the fat on their rosters. And so there is more programs that didn't sign as many right now because they're not sure what the roster space is going to be like then and how they're going to fund that 105-man roster as it moves forward, TP.
Wrapping up segment one, talking a little bit of Notre Dame basketball, kind of a reversal of fortunes this weekend. Notre Dame men played on Saturday, women on Sunday. The Notre Dame men's team defeated Pittsburgh. You were there, JB, 76-72. They did it without Braden Shrewsbury. They did it without Matt Alaco. And then the women in just an absolutely terrific game on Sunday. The number one ranked Notre Dame basketball team came up short in double overtime, 104-95. Number 13, NC State was, boy, way better than they normally are at the free throw line. They're like 312th or 316th in the country in free throw percentage and made their first 20, and that played an integral role in them pulling that game out in double overtime. Of course, Sonia Citron hit a three at the end of regulation, another clutch play by one of several great players on this Notre Dame team. I think that, nationally, Citron gets a little bit overshadowed sometimes by Olivia Miles and Hannah Hidalgo, but she's sensational in her own way. So, it ends a 19-game winning streak. I guess it's kind of an old time philosophy or thinking that, it doesn't hurt to lose before you get a little bit before you go into the tournament. And I really I really believe that in this case. They wanted to get an undefeated season in ACC play. They were 15-0 going into the game. But credit to NC State. They played great basketball. Notre Dame hadn't lost since the middle of the middle of December.
Yeah.
So 19 in a row. The streak ends. The polls are out. They've dropped to number 3. I'm not sure that they necessarily deserve that going to NC State against the number 13 Wolfpack, but they're number 3. Ultimately, it won't matter. Maybe in seeding it will have some role, but tough loss for them.
Yeah, I'm with you, TP, and I had this discussion yesterday with my wife, Jess. She goes to pretty much all the home games with her grandmother. That's a special bond that they have. And she was asking me about the loss. And I just said, look, the more you stack those wins, the larger that bullseye gets. And everybody's gunning for Notre Dame anyway, but that bullseye gets larger and larger. And it carries a bit more pressure every time. So I do think that this overall can ultimately be a positive thing for Neil Ivey's squad as long as they learn from it. I didn't think they played with great composure in the first half. I know they like to push tempo, but I thought that they just really forced some shots and lacked a little bit of composure in the first half. And then you're right about Sonia Citron. She would be the number one option on probably 300 other programs in women's college basketball, and she's very selfless as the number three or number four option for Notre Dame, but behind Hidalgo and behind Olivia Miles and even Maddie Westbeld to a certain extent. But Notre Dame is so deep; they do have to get more from their bench. I know going into overtime yesterday, I think 84 of 86 points, something like that, or 82 of 84 points had come from Notre Dame starters. So that's one thing that worries me about this team for the postseason. They've got two games this week. Win those two, they still win the ACC championship. They still would go into the ACC tournament as a number one seed. And in my opinion, as long as they take care of business on those two games this week and they win the ACC championship, they sew up a number one seed, and they're going to sew up then hosting responsibilities to begin the tournament. And that's obviously key because this is a team that just doesn't lose at home.
What a what an incredible game to observe yesterday. It was fast paced and very offensive. I thought there were times, as you mentioned, JB, like in the first half. I mean, I thought their defense was a little bit leaky, but both offenses were humming. Hidalgo had 26, Miles had 22, Citron had 23, and then Leatu King, who's been such a huge addition to them from Pittsburgh, 16 points, 9 rebounds. But yeah, like you look at the playing time and you know their top five, they're essentially all they with the two overtimes, so 50 minutes total. All of them played in the mid 40 minutes, and that will take a toll. So they don't go very deep, but it was a great game, and you know, maybe one that they could afford to lose as long as they pick it, as you said, learn from the process and get better. Texas is elevated to number one. They had a really good week. They won a couple ranked games, and then UCLA moved ahead of Notre Dame into the number two spot. The men's game, JB, you were there, 76-72. Um, you know, when you're lacking a couple key people and you're struggling to the level that Notre Dame had been, that was a much needed win. They're 6-10. They're solidly into you know, there's 6-10, so four more games. The women just have two, I believe.
Yeah.
They're right now they're solidly in the ACC tournament because the three bottom dwellers are having such a poor year, and it's three that don't make it. But it certainly was good to see them play much better basketball and to pull one out after some of the struggles they had in recent games.
Yeah, the struggles, the strife, some of that brought on by Micah Shrewsbury himself. I would contend in all of his years as a head coach that was his most significant back to the wall game ever as a head coach. Because you were staring at, if you don't win that game, you're losing three home games in a 7 day stretch.
Oof.
Two of them already being blowouts, and you would risk losing three games at home in a 7 day stretch in year two when you're supposed to be showing progress, and they have not. So, you know, Marcus Burton, fantastic. Marcus Burton and Tay Davis, I think, combined for 41 points. They were just so good. I did find it very interesting asking Micah Shrewsbury after the game. I'd noticed how much more emotional Tay Davis seemed during the game, and he was barking to himself. He was barking to his teammates. He was barking to Pitt players. He really was invested in that contest, and that's why I asked Micah if he noticed it, if he had picked up on anything, or if he had challenged Tay, and that's when he revealed he didn't have to challenge Tay. He'd met individually with all players last Thursday, and when Tay came in, and obviously you can contest that Tay has been their most consistent performer for the duration of the season. He said, "What more can I do, Coach? How can I help this team even more?" And I think Shrewsbury was, as a coach, really moved by that, really appreciated that, and man, he absolutely needed that. Tay Davis delivered on Saturday. J.R. Knesny stepping into a starting role. It's been a miserable year for him. Hard to explain his rotation. Hard to explain his lack of playing time for many stretches of the season. But he answered the call in his first starting assignment of the year. Finished with 10 points, hit 6 free throws, all 6 free throws in the final 37 seconds. And again, that one win doesn't right everything for Notre Dame at all, but boy, it kept this thing from it's snowballed to an extent already, but it kept it from avalanching because it's two daunting tasks this week on the road against Clemson and Wake Forest, and then probably two winnable home games to try and salvage a modicum of momentum going into the ACC tournament.
Tay Davis has a hard edge to him, and you're aware of that sometimes in the interview room because he doesn't always necessarily want to talk about everything that transpired on the basketball court, but he has been very consistent for them. Cole Serta stepped up in the absence of Braden Shrewsbury with 12 points, and that tells you what kind of scoring ability he has. But he's one of too many Notre Dame men's basketball players that are a liability on the defensive end. And with Serta, it's just he's a freshman. He's not strong enough, but it was good to see him. That's really his first, I believe that's his first major explosion offensively.
Yeah, and all 12 of those points coming in a row, TP. He took Notre Dame from up 40 to 39, and he scored the next 12. And it was still unfortunate for Notre Dame that it was still only a 1 point game by the time he finished his personal 12-0 scoring spree. But again, where would they have been Saturday without Cole Serta scoring 12 consecutive points? And that prompts the question that you have to ask big picture, how much more dire would this situation have been had they not found a way to get it done on Saturday? And that leads me to maybe one of the all-time greatest quotes that I'll carry with me forever from Marcus Burton when Cole Serta was being asked a question, and Burton just sort of interrupted everybody. And he's got the most personality on the team. It's awesome to see. And he just said, "Man, something y'all don't know. He'd be in the gym early as." And it was awesome. And I wrote the quote in my story. There was not a chance in hell I wasn't going to use it verbatim.
Looking to upgrade your wardrobe, founded by Notre Dame alum Go Wang, you've seen ESQ's custom clothing on the player walk and all of your favorite players and coaches. With more than a decade of making the best bespoke clothing available, ESQ will help you look and feel your best. From a perfect fitting suit or sport coat, shirt or bomber jacket, or that perfect tuxedo for wedding season, check out esqclothing.com and book an appointment to upgrade your wardrobe today. Mention Irish Illustrated and get 10% off your entire purchase. That's esqclothing.com. We're not burning up the boards in second segment, but we are going to be talking about a lot of recruiting. Segment 2 coming up with Eric Thomas. Segment 2 of Irish Illustrated Insider today is a recruiting focus, and we bring in Eric Thomas, our recruiting analyst, one of two, along with Brian Alt. We hope to have some podcasts with that duo here moving forward, but we did want to trying to answer some of the questions that we know that a lot of people have had about recruiting. Eric, we are in a dead period. I know people have a lot of questions about why there isn't more great news happening with the class of 2027. And I think you have some multiple reasons, but one of them is the fact that it is a dead period. And the month of January was quite different for Notre Dame football than it normally is.
Absolutely. Yeah, coming out of the playoff run, obviously, when you adjust the schedule back so much, like they did for the 12-team playoff, it's going to create some new sort of paths and challenges that you have to overcome. And one of the big ones that Notre Dame and Ohio State in particular are dealing with in this cycle is between I guess, the day after the championship, right? January 21st to when the dead period kicked off. You only had 13 days for those staffs to really dive in and reignite some of these recruiting processes that, let's face it, when you have a national recruiting base to pull from, tend to go a little bit more dormant during the season because guys aren't making the same travel they can if, like, let's say a kid's from the Carolinas and he visits South Carolina 3 times. That's just a different opportunity that those schools are going to have. So for Notre Dame, I think the timing has been a little bit difficult for them to try and get back on the radar as quickly as they would like to with some of this. It is probably a little bit of a negative as well that when they were working around that in a creative way by sending out staff in mid-January, trying to connect with a lot of these guys, the number one name that was connecting with these players was Chad Bowden. He was going all across the country. He did tours on the West Coast, on the East Coast, met with a lot of their top prospects, including guys like Simeote Katoanga, who just committed to USC yesterday. So there's sort of a lot of moving pieces right now that Notre Dame got caught in the middle of that just sort of set them off on a weird trajectory that I think a lot of schools are going to learn they're going to be on if they're in the playoffs. The other sort of big side of things that I think is important for folks to recognize here is, as with any school that has turnover, when you lose coaches, when you lose assistants, when you lose staff members, there's always going to be some level of step back in the immediate recruiting impact, right? There's always going to be some sort of drawback from that as people just get comfortable with one another again. And I think for Notre Dame, losing Chad Bowden to USC is huge because not only was he, heavily involved in the sort of the personified side of the recruiting arm, he was the face of a lot of Notre Dame's efforts. But obviously, Dylan McCullough was a guy who worked in a silo. He ran that entire running back operation by himself. So you have a couple different positions that are really sort of uniquely siloed, is I guess the way I would put it, that are now gone from Notre Dame, and they have to rebuild that entire process from the studs. So there's quite a bit working against Notre Dame for this initial sort of push here as we go through the February dead period that leads into the beginning of March. But even with that said, given where Notre Dame is sort of building and the timeline of this sort of exciting run, I think for fans, the realistic sort of break for this to actually start to create positive impact for Notre Dame, that's going to come in the 2027 class. In March, on March 17th, Pot of Gold Day, you're going to see a lot of offers go out, probably a couple dozen of them. It's going to be to the main line group of guys who are going to make up the board in 2027. So as Notre Dame starts to engage with all these guys sort of at the ground level, they'll have that championship run to go off of. They'll have that excitement to sort of build into their pitch and make the foundation of their pitch, future success that they're trying to build off of. So there's something really inherently valuable about going in with that on the ground floor that Notre Dame will be able to capitalize on. That, like I said, just for a number of reasons, in 2026, it wasn't really realistic for them to hit a home run coming out of that in a 2-week span.
I think those are great points you bring up, Eric. Glad to have you on the pod today. And that echoes some stuff that I heard from campus last week when I was asking them, where do you feel the push will be? Where will be the quote unquote CFP bump? And they said it's going to be the 27 class. And we're already starting to see it to a certain extent with the 27 class. They expect to see it big time with Pot of Gold. And Pot of Gold right now is where you have to really rely on Carter Allman, Caleb Davis, Becca Seitz, the people that are still there, still in the building, that have been through previous Pot of Gold days, so they know what to expect. They know how to enhance it. It's also when Notre Dame has to lean on FIM to get the digital component going for Pot of Gold Day. It's a huge day for Notre Dame. It's a day that the Notre Dame has owned for several years, but it took to a different level under Chad Bowden. I'll be curious to see if USC tries to do anything to counter Notre Dame's Pot of Gold Day on March 17th now that Bowden is out there. But that was stressed to me. And honestly, it was point blank said to me, like, hey, a lot of the people we've heard with on the 26 class that took note of our playoff run are probably not Notre Dame fits because they didn't want to talk to us until we got to the playoff. And now they're like, oh, I can play for a championship and Notre Dame, will you pay me? So I do think that's an interesting component. What it does is I was told point blank opens more doors, especially more doors of the people they're trying to get open that they believe are Notre Dame people and that now saw the playoff run, Eric.
Absolutely.
So, Eric, as we look further, I mean, you talked about changes at running back coach, losing Dylan McCullough, Jawan Sider, who, along with Chris Ash, we expect the media to be speaking to them in fairly short order. So that's a change at running back. Sider's he has a great reputation as a recruiter.
Yeah.
Why don't you get into some of the possibilities? I love Javian Osborne. That doesn't sound realistic for Notre Dame anymore. I thought that guy was pretty special, but there's some really good ones on their list. Where do they stand with running backs under running back coach Jawan Sider?
Yeah, Osborne is one of my favorites as well, TP. I was really hoping that when he canceled his Texas official visit last week after the Texas running backs coach, Tashard Choice, I believe, took a job in the NFL, it seemed like maybe Notre Dame was going to be able to sneak some momentum in there, but that one's trailing right towards Ann Arbor. Beyond that, there's a couple new names to know. There's a couple guys who have already been there for a while. I'll start with the latter group just because folks are going to be a little bit more familiar with them. So the big name that folks will know is Jonas Walton down in Carrollton, Georgia. Excellent running back. He actually, his younger brother might be a better back than he is, which is saying something for a guy who's top 100. But really, really explosive back. He does a lot of things well in the passing game. In particular, he's got enough wiggle and shift to him that like he's that running back, but you can just toss him a check down and it kind of looks like Jadarian Price ripping 75 yards, where it's just very, very quick. So he's excellent there. Another JV and Mallory. The presumption is that Miami currently has the edge for Mallory. He is a Florida prospect. He already announced his official visits with the Hurricanes, so they're definitely trending the right way for his services. A little bit of an interesting disparity between those two. Walton was never really recruited by Siders, so that relationship is really starting from the bottom. Kind of got to build it up. But when it comes to Mallory, he was actually recruited, offered, and pursued heavily by Penn State. So he has a lot of familiarity with Sider. He actually got back to me and said he was extremely excited about the hire. He thought it was someone that was going to be able to continue to build that program and that room the right way. And then another name I'll throw out here is Zack Walker. As you guys know, Notre Dame has done quite well for itself in Missouri recently. Zack Walker looks like he could be the next guy coming in from Show Me State and really, adding to that running back room. I know Aeneas Williams and Jeremiah Love have been, big time players in that recruitment. Whenever they've had them around, they've tried to lean on those personalities. Kyron Williams is another one that is available to Notre Dame and obviously makes a lot of inroads and other local guys. So there's a lot for them to be able to put in front of Walker. He is going to be visiting the second week of June. His official visit is already scheduled, so we know when he'll be on campus. And then beyond that, Messiah Mickens from here in Pennsylvania, he's been committed to Penn State for a long, long time. Even with a name like Messiah, that sounds like it should end up at Notre Dame. He's been at Penn State for a while. A little bit of an interesting recruitment for him. So he committed to Penn State really early, and it seemed like there was nothing that was going to shake him until all of a sudden he started looking around like guys do. I believe he took a visit to South Carolina, looked around at a couple SEC schools, and ultimately he decided, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to stick it. I'm just going to go with Penn State. I feel comfortable there. Sider's there. And then, of course, he got hired away to Notre Dame and things have opened up. So he's since scheduled a couple of official visits. I believe he'll get down to South Carolina. I believe he's planning to visit Tennessee. He may be planning to visit Oregon. And then he has officials to Notre Dame and Penn State as well. So quite a busy schedule for Messiah Mickens. Speaking to sources around South Bend, even before the hire was made official, they felt pretty confident that they were going to have a real shot at him. But this is not quite as simple as like, oh, his coach is now at Notre Dame, so he'll be at Notre Dame. He's going to take his time. He's going to consider new data. So a little bit of a we'll see on him, but he's an excellent prospect and another 4-star guy that they are going to be competitive for.
Eric, you wrote about Brian Bonner, and I believe you used the phrase the most complete of those backs. And just like for the record, I'd like to say of the group of Osborne, Walton, Mallory, and Walker, I like Osborne first, but I like Walker second. I love his vision. I think that he's got some real burst to him. Not rated as highly as those guys, but he would be number 2 on that list. But why do you think Bonner's the most complete of the group?
I like Bonner, and most complete was honestly his profile, even beyond just being on the field. Like when you look at his offer sheet, he's got offers from Stanford. He has offers from Northwestern. He has top academic schools, and he's spoken openly about the importance of academics in his recruiting process. He's someone who is versatile in that he can do a lot of good pass catching things. I don't know if he's necessarily the same level of a receiver as some of these guys, but he can do a lot of things well as a receiver. And the big thing in TP, you'll know this, when you're assessing blocking of young running backs, so much of what you're looking for is just attitude and intentionality. Are they willing to put themselves in danger and, in the path of an oncoming rusher and just make the block, even if physically they're probably not capable of doing that at the next level yet. And with Bonner, I thought I saw a player who had the right intentionality and attitude, even if there's room to grow in terms of the actual capability. I just think that he offers a great profile fit back for Notre Dame that can kind of check all of your different boxes, even if, at the high end, I don't know that he's quite the explosive player that Walton is, or if he's quite the just like, oh my God, that guy's a stallion that Osborne is. He might not have that top end ability, but He's very well rounded, and I think that his skill set, if he were to, enter the Notre Dame class as part of 2026, I actually think his skill set would complement very well with Nolan James from the 2025 class, but a little bit more of a physical tool set to work from than James.
Popping over to the defensive side of the ball, Eric, you mentioned that Katawanga verbally committed to USC recently. That's a blow, right? Because Notre Dame was feeling, I think, pretty good about that situation. But give us an idea where they go from here, and the battle for quality defensive tackles continues for Notre Dame.
Yeah, that was a tough one. We'd heard for a few weeks now that USC was feeling confident. It's always a little bit weird from our side as beat writers to try and validate confidence of another beat when even the national side is a little bit like, we will see how real that is. But seems like he really kind of hit an accelerator with USC over the past couple of weeks. I don't think there's any coincidence with some of the changes that they're seeing in their front office, so to speak, that happened. I don't expect Notre Dame's done there. I think they're going to continue to try to work him. They're going to keep trying to get him on campus. He's a guy that when he visited in the fall alongside Madden Faramo, Notre Dame people were already pretty impressed with him coming into those meetings, but just the frame on him, I think, blew people away a little bit when he got on campus. The growth potential that he had to be one of the top presumed linemen in the country. Notre Dame really bought that belief, so they'll continue to go after him. Another big name to know, and things are kind of murky here, is Rodney Dunham. He's the 5-star from down in North Carolina. Notre Dame was pretty high up, probably safe to say within his top three as recently as last summer. Seems like throughout the course of this fall, he just sort of moved his process closer to the SEC, where he's at locally. So there's a couple distances to overcome, if you will, just schools that have had a better access to him and have made inroads there. But Notre Dame has a good shot. They will get Dunham on campus in the spring. I'm not sure if he's angling for like a late spring official visit or if he's going to try and come in March for an unofficial and then get back for an official at this point. But from what I have been able to dig up so far, I think the plan is he wants to get here in March for an unofficial and then return is the general outlook. Beyond that, there's a couple prospects that I think are still pretty likely to end up with Notre Dame that are going to fall into your traditional blue chip category, right? You're not looking at converted linebackers becoming DNs or the classics here. Mikhail Blade is the first one I'll bring up. He's a local Illinois prospect. He more cleanly, I think, projects to like a strong side defensive end, but he does have the frame is there if he needed to play 3-tech, but I don't know that I would want him there. But Mikhail Blade's a really, really good prospect. He is someone who, with Notre Dame, they've been on him for a while. They've been setting the tone in this process for a while. They have an in because he was teammates last year, even if they didn't play together, with Christopher Burgess Jr., Notre Dame's defensive end signee. Blade actually transferred to Simeon, got hurt, and never played with Burgess, but they have a good relationship. Beyond Blade, I really, really like Ebenezer Iwatade. He's currently a composite 4-star. That is like a brand new minted ranking. This man was a 3-star unranked just a couple of months ago. He is raw. I think you have to start there. There's still a lot to learn and a lot of consistency to build into his game. But man, when you see the flashes, his first step off the line is unreal at its best. And there's a lot of, I think when we look at guys who have that ability, when we talk about guys who the quickness off the line is their hallmark, I think a lot of times you sort of can put them into a box where it's like, oh, they're just a speed rusher, but that's not really what Iwatade is. He does a good job of converting speed to power. He does a great job of using his length to create power into the chest of guys. Now, does he still need to refine a lot of these things and maybe get his hands blown off of guys with chops and swipes a little bit less? Yeah, but overall, for a young player, he is someone Notre Dame sees as a future top 100 player. I don't think that that's far off. And he is definitely sort of like a top of the board, let's get him committed now kind of prospect, because Notre Dame is really fighting the clock on this one. They expect his profile and his star is just going to keep rising, and they want him in the class before he reaches whatever critical mass of the SEC starts to really take over his interest. They've already come sniffing. They couldn't get him on board before the SEC came calling. So now they're just trying to get it done as soon as possible. Couple more here that I want to make sure I mention. Elijah Golden, he is one of the top defensive linemen in the country, was at IMG Academy, had a little bit of a, I don't want to call it a weird transfer because it just happened like the first week of the season. But he ended up moving down to Cardinal Mooney in Sarasota from IMG Academy. There was some concern initially after that transfer that there was going to be academic hangups that might cause Notre Dame to fall out of the process with Golden. Speaking with his coach, Notre Dame alumnus Jared Clark, sounds like that stuff's all taken care of. He had a little bit of a snag adjusting to the speed of the curriculum at the new school. Basically, he was behind, had to dig himself out of the hole a little bit, and now he's all caught up. So, sounds like Notre Dame is in a very good spot for being competitive for Elijah Golden. They're kind of right in that top group with Michigan and Virginia Tech. He's actually from Virginia originally, so they're going to get a little bit of that hometown benefit. Right now, I think that Notre Dame is in a very good spot to potentially land Golden in the official visit window. That said, it's tough for me to say who's the outright leader right now. He hasn't been very public about that information in a number of months. And quite frankly, I think that Notre Dame is going to have to nail the official visit to stave off that local Virginia Tech influence. It seems like he's very interested in playing for the hometown Hokies. There's a couple other guys in there. Tiki Hola down from Texas. Damari Simeon's another guy that they're heavily involved with. He is from New Jersey. He goes to St. Augustine Prep. Couple guys like JJ Finch in Indianapolis that they're in on, but it doesn't seem like there's a ton of mutual interest. So once you get past that first line of 5 guys or so, TP, that's when the questions really start to open. It's not that there's not offers to players. It's not that there's not good players available that Notre Dame is in on, but the question is really about mutual interest. And after that top end line, you really start to fall off a cliff there with mutual interest based on where the board is right now.
I agree with you about Blades as far as a strong side defensive end. I think he's pretty prototypical for that spot.
Mm-hmm.
Iwatade, he's light, man. He's listed at 210 and he's light, but when he's 225, he's got a chance to be pretty special. I got a glimpse of IMG Academy this past weekend, driving by it with family. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I would just note on Simeon worth bearing to watch is that Virginia Tech just last week hired a new general manager, Trey Nair. He's been at Alabama, worked under Saban, most recently had been the GM at West Virginia. So it'll be interesting to see what his impact is at Virginia Tech in that GM role. I know he's very well regarded by fellow GMs that I talk to around college football. The other thing I would note is that Virginia Tech had to revamp staff significantly, and not for the same reasons that Notre Dame did. Virginia Tech had to revamp staff because this is a must-win season for the Hokies. They stumbled to 6-7 last year after a big breakthrough season the year before. There's a lot of pressure on Brent Pry and that coaching staff this year. So much more stability at Notre Dame, which as this thing goes on, and as Eric so deftly outlined, if Notre Dame makes a great impression on an official visit and continues to showcase that stability and elite play on the field, those are factors that could ultimately help Notre Dame, I believe.
As we move on to the pass catchers, I know most Notre Dame fans will remember the name Emmett Mosley, a wide receiver for the Fighting Irish. And Emmett Mosley, the fifth, is a quality player for Stanford. But there's a younger brother there, Eric, Trent Mosley. Notre Dame's looking for a visit here coming up in the spring.
Yep. So I connected with Trent just a couple days ago. He is unbelievable. This last fall wasn't the best representation of his ability because he was dealing with some injury issues. But as a sophomore in 2023, he was named the Trinity League MVP. Trinity League, that private Catholic football league down in Southern California, one of the most competitive in the country. He is, dominant when he is healthy and at his best. There is some intrigue here recently, and once again, I don't want to keep bringing it back to the rivals, but there is some USC smoke around him lately. Seems like that mission that Bode mentioned in his introductory press conference of trying to keep the best talent home in California and really kind of put a fence around that state. The intentionality behind that is showing early, and it's bearing some results. We saw it with Catalonga. You're seeing it with some hype with Mosley and USC and a few others. So we'll have to see exactly how that develops. He told me he was targeting May for his official visit for Notre Dame. So we will see exactly when that gets announced. We'll see exactly how he balances that versus some of his other upcoming OVs. The last I saw, it was still Notre Dame, USC, UCLA as kind of some of the big ones here, and then there was a few other schools that were still fighting to be relevant. But it seems like Stanford as well. Excuse me. And it seems like Notre Dame and USC are still kind of that top group, but USC is just flying up in this thing. So the staff will have their work cut out for them to be able to land Trent Mosley in this cycle. Beyond that, TP, I know when you look at the issues that Notre Dame has at wide receiver, a lot of my reporting I've tried to highlight two specific needs, and that's team speed and that's boundary receiver, just getting those big body pass catchers who can do work on the sideline. Notre Dame actually has a good volume of receivers who qualify. Check that speed box available. Connor Salmon, we just announced today, he's going to be taking his official visit to Notre Dame on June 13th to 15th. Braden Robinson, he already scheduled his visit. I believe he's going to be there for June 20th, same weekend as Legend Bay, who actually plays quarterback in high school, but he's an athlete. And then Bubba Frazier got offered earlier this week. He was verified at the Under Armour Next camp. I want to say it was last week. He ran like a 4.51 or something. Really, really good speed for a verified time for a young guy like that. So there's a couple of different speed guys. On that, Notre Dame did just fall off the list for one of their top speed guys, Naeem Burrows. He's actually teammates with Simeon Caldwell down at Bowles School in Jacksonville. Excuse me. He scheduled his official visits. Notre Dame was not part of the initial list, despite being in his top five. And it seems like things are kind of moving away from South Bend on that front. If I had to guess right now, I think that guy's probably heading to Florida or Clemson. And then on the boundary receiver side, Jaden Petit and Brody Keefe are two guys who could fit that boundary role. Maybe less prototypical, but has the tool set. Jermichael Finley's son, Caden, he could also kind of fit that boundary role. He's only 6 foot, so he's not that natural, like 6'4", up and over boundary receiver, but skill set wise, I mean, he's got excellent length, really long arms. He can elevate easily. So he can do all of the things you need a boundary receiver to do in an undersized package. And then the other one I'll throw out here, and Tom Loy had some good reporting on this today. I want to make sure I shout out Dylan Faison. He is an easy name to ignore. Obviously, his brother's already on campus. He's a 3-star, so we don't got to think about that guy. But Dylan Faison's an excellent prospect. This fall, he really took some steps forward. He looked far, far more explosive than he had as a sophomore. That's both in terms of just getting out of his stance and being able to explode off the line, kind of create that initial separation, acceleration. That's in his leaping ability. I mean, this is a guy who a year ago, he was not making catches up and over cornerbacks, and he was doing that last fall. Dylan Faison has a pretty unreal ceiling athletically. I mean, he has all the tools you can possibly look for. He is currently considering official visits to Florida and USC. So I don't know if that's the end of the list, if that list is going to grow, if he's going to cancel those visits. This is all up in the air right now. I wrote today on the board, he's a guy who committed so early to Notre Dame. He didn't have a recruiting process. He just committed. So for him to, kind of verify his process and say, hey, I made the right choice for me. I'm not just doing this because my brother's there. I wanted to make the right choice for my future. I want to check out these schools and just check that box. I don't think there's a lot of concern about them losing him, but it is worth mentioning that as of, I believe that reporting came out today, there is some at least consideration for Dylan Faison to look around a little bit.
Yeah, and he's been. Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say he's been a prospect that Notre Dame has been very well aware of since the fall that they would have to be in a battle to hang on to. He's considered incredibly fast. People in South Florida will tell you he's probably in some ways already a more advanced football player than his brother, and we've seen what his brother has done for Notre Dame and what Jordan Faison has done for Notre Dame in football and lacrosse. But there's just tremendous belief in him. I think when it's all said and done, and you would know better than me, Eric, I expect him to be a composite 4-star prospect, a guy that continues to climb the rankings. He's just too fast. It's my understanding he would instantly arrive at Notre Dame as one of the 5 fastest players on the roster. He has that kind of speed.
And
Absolutely.
As good of a lacrosse player as Jordan is, I think Dylan's better. I mean, based upon the high school film that you see of him, he's just so sudden in his change of direction. is lightning fast. A couple of the other guys you mentioned, Eric, Bubba Frazier. Again, I think there's a physical maturity there. A lot of times you see a high school kid. Does he run like a high school player or does he run like a guy that's already in college? I think Bubba Frazier has a little bit of that in him. And then Petit really has great length, and I like the way that Keith high points the football. So there's some promise there. Okay, wrapping up segment 2, Eric, we need to look at some quarterbacks, do we not?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, the next crop of quarterbacks, obviously in 2026, Notre Dame has their man, Noah Grubbs. He is someone that Notre Dame identified very early on um, as one of their preferred sort of options for in the 2026 class. He committed on June 1st of last year, just ahead of the Irish Invasion event while he was on campus. So they have their guy there. So for Notre Dame at this point, for taking swings at the quarterback position, they're already on to, and I wrote, this has to be a typo because 2027 stresses me out, man. That's where we're at. Their top choice that's emerging right now is a kid down from Benton, Louisiana, Malachi Ziegler. He's pretty unbelievable. Malachi's big arm. He isn't like the dual threat quarterback of the classic running build for college, right? Big arm, maybe not the most accurate, really fast, can create all sorts of different plays with his feet. He's more so of a mobile to throw kind of quarterback as opposed to just like a direct runner, but he's excellent at that. He can move for a young player, especially for a guy who just finished his sophomore year in high school. I really appreciate the way he can move around the pocket. I think there is a certain amount of, I don't know if you want to call it veteran experience there, or if it just looks more mature than most guys his age navigating the pocket and kind of keeping his footwork clean, which is one of the biggest issues you're going to see with young quarterbacks is their bottom half is just an absolute mess in the pocket. There's a couple other guys that Notre Dame has identified as top potential targets that don't seem to have quite as much of Gino Guidugli's attention, if you will. He visited Ziegler at his school. They're hosting him in March, end of March for spring practice. I don't actually know how to pronounce it. I think it's Borke. Peter Borke and Keegan Croucher are two other options that Coach Guidugli has visited. Speaking with these quarterbacks, it's interesting. It seems like when they're doing these off-season visits, Guidugli's actually structuring them almost similar to the way quarterback coaches in the NFL meet with NFL draft prospects, where they'll handle like a basic install. They'll go through a couple plays. He'll ask them about some of their favorite plays, about stuff that he wants to run, whatever. He'll just sort of mix it all up, right? And then they'll chat and talk. And then, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes later, he'll ask them, okay, by the way, that play I ran with you at install, 42 gun left, post right. What was your assignment on that for, calling the protection? And they'll have to answer and kind of go back and work through it. I know that really impressed Ziegler. He actually really appreciated the fact that not only was he being quizzed like a pro, but the fact that Coach Guidugli clearly expected him to do well meant a lot to him. And I've heard the same thing from some of these other quarterbacks, that they're getting these sort of quizzes, and Notre Dame's trying to sort of in the early stages here, test mental acuity of these quarterbacks, which I just thought was such an interesting note to come popping out from all of these conversations. Another guy that Notre Dame hasn't spent a ton of time on to this point, at least not publicly, but I would expect that to change significantly, sort of following Pot of Gold Day, is Gunnar Rivers, Philip Rivers' son. He is a top 100 player from down in Alabama. He's going to be one of the most sought after prospects in the entire class, sort of regardless of his actual ranking where it's at right now, right? Like it's all well and good to be that top 50 player, but you're Philip Rivers' son, man. You're already going to get plenty of interest for your NFL bloodlines and the access to coaching you had and whatever else. And he's got better physical tools than his dad ever did. So he's a guy that I think, Notre Dame fans are definitely going to be interested in. I think that the presumption is probably that he's more likely to end up in the SEC than, say, his dad's alma mater, NC State, or with Notre Dame. But it's still so early that ultimately, if they can get in on that process, now here and as we transition to March, there's going to be a very real chance for Notre Dame to kind of pick their poison at quarterback again in this cycle. And then the last one I'll throw out here, it's actually a guy that we saw last year at Irish Invasion TP, is Trey Taylor. Man, he's got a live arm. He's a good player. He just doesn't seem to have the upward momentum on the board that some of these other quarterbacks have with Notre Dame. Michigan, Nebraska, LSU, there's a number of schools that are after him. These are top programs, so there's no indictment to his ability, but he's been on Notre Dame's campus 3, 4 times now. Notre Dame hasn't offered. They haven't really made it seem like he's the top priority for them. They were left out of his top five, and then they scheduled a visit like 48 hours later. So there's a little bit of weirdness here, but it basically seems to be boiling down to Trey Taylor is very interested in Notre Dame. I just don't know that Notre Dame is interested enough in Trey Taylor to actually take his commitment and move that needle ahead of other schools like Michigan.
One thing to remember on the Rivers kid, of course, is Riley Leonard's strong relationship with Philip Rivers, and that's something that Notre Dame believes as this goes forward will help keep it in contention for the younger Rivers services, because those two, that's a real substantial relationship that they have. It's not like surface level. They're both from Alabama and they've spoken. No, there's a real relationship between Philip Rivers and Riley Leonard.
Eric Thomas, appreciate having you. Really good stuff. The demand for this information is never ending, and we've tried to answer the demand and the questions that have been thrown out here this week. So that's going to wrap up our this edition of Irish Illustrated Insider. For Eric Thomas and John Brice, I'm Tim Priester. And by the way, we're as a staff, we've kind of been spread out here for a couple weeks. So our second podcast this week is going to be in Irish Illustrated ISO. I'm not sure that we know yet quite when we're going to record that, but that will be our second podcast this week. Until then, Tim Priester, John Brice, Eric Thomas. This has been Irish Illustrated Insider.